come back with picture in picture, and it doesn't seem to be. We're on.
Hello, for my children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. My name is Giselle Denise Conner, née Neto. I was born December 29, 1922, in France, north of Paris, and we lived in the town where I was born, which was called Saint-Quentin, until I was about 8 years old. It was my brother, Marcel, my father and mother. We lived in a house, and my father, who was born in Algeria and hated the cold weather of northern France, decided that he should go back to Algeria where the climate was more to his liking. So when I was about 8 years old, he had a job waiting for him there, and his family was there. So when I was about 8 years old, we moved to North Africa. It was a French, well, it was not really a colony. We call it a department of France, but to most people it was a colony. And we moved there. The town we moved in was Constantine, and my father went to work as a manager of a cabinet making shop, and we started school. My brother was 2 years older than I am, and I adjusted. I was just a little girl. My mother hated it. She didn't want to go to stay in North Africa. She wanted to go back to France.
What was Grandpa's first name?
From your father?
What was Grandpa's first name?
My father was born in Algeria. His father was the first postmaster of a little other town they lived in. They delivered mail, the horse and buggy, in those days. And he had, let's see, 2 brothers and 3 sisters. So they were a pretty big family. I never knew my grandmother. She died before we moved to France. My grandfather had been dead for quite a few years, but I did meet some of my father's relatives, aunts and uncles, and they were very nice. I liked them. My mother didn't like them, but she didn't like anything about North Africa anyway. And so my father went to France during World War I, met my mother. They were married there, and they started their life there. However, like I say, the climate was so cold in the winter that he just couldn't take it. But in Algeria, he was relatively happy, but his wife wasn't. So she made his life miserable, because if a woman is not happy, that's usually what she does. And well, after working several years for a company who had asked him to come and manage the place, he decided to go in business of his own. And we moved to a much bigger apartment, and which was near his place of business. And we started school, and my brother and I were not in the same school because he was older and I was, so we didn't see much of each other. And I enjoyed school. I was a good student and I enjoyed school. And my favorite subject was French, believe it or not. It was French, and I loved French composition. And I read a lot. There was no radio, no television, so what do? You read. And I loved gymnastics. I used to be jumping around, doing backflip, splits, whatever. I love to do that. I was very physical. My brother looked at me as if I was a little crazy woman because he only believed in studying and reading. He was a snob.
And your brother's name?
My brother's name is Marcel, and when my son was born, I didn't want to give him a French name because around here Marcel was a girl. And my husband said, no, call him after your brother. So it became Marcel. Marcel George, right?
Right.
And as they got older, then his name became Marc, M-A-R-C, which is an abbreviation of Marcel. And, okay, where was I? Well, when I was senior in high school, the war started. It was 5 long years of war. I was not afraid, because when you're young, you're never afraid. But it was very difficult. Everything becomes scarce. We had a young neighbor who had a baby, and she had a ration of milk to feed her baby. But a week before the end of the month, she would run out of milk. And she would come crying to my mother, "What am I going to do? I don't have any milk for my babies." Well, we didn't have milk because they only gave baby to sick people and to babies. So she would make thin potato soup and fed the baby that. Guess in this country, we don't know what those things are because we have so much of everything that even the poor people on food stamps have a lot more than what people had during the war because the stores were closed, there was nothing to sell. All right, where am I? Oh well, but when during the war, well I was still in school though, but I went to a normal school to get, so I could teach elementary school.
And a normal school is what they call.
A teacher's college. We call
Okay.
that teacher's college, yeah. I don't think it exists anymore. Things have changed. It was, let's see, how long ago was that? Oh, it was about, I'm afraid to say it. It was about, well, I'm 84, it was about 60-some years ago. I can't believe I lived that long, but anyway. And was a lot of soldiers, and I met some very nice soldiers, British, Canadian, Australian, and American. And I dated a few, although I was not allowed to date, but somehow I managed. My mother was very strict. I had to be home before dark. And I couldn't go anywhere unless she knew exactly where I was going and when I was getting home. So, but when I met the man I married, I really was not very interested in him. But for some reason, he was very insistent, and he weakened me, and I said, okay, I'll marry you. So we were married in North Africa, and when I told him, I said, you have to ask my parents, my hands in marriage to my parents. And he said, oh, you do? I said, yeah, that's what you have to do. So he went to my mother, she was ironing, and he said, in broken French, I want to marry Giselle. And she said, no, you can't marry Giselle. And he said, pourquoi? Which means why? He said, because you live too far away. But to make a long story short, we didn't get married. And we were married almost 58 years when he died. So, well, we were married, and I had to go to Algiers, which is the capital of Algeria, to get my papers in order to be able to come to the States.
Before you go any further, it seems that there was a funny story about how you came to know Bud.
Oh, yes, all right, I had forgotten about that. He was working for Air Force Headquarters, which was established in a museum, which was near where I worked. So I would see him and a lot of other GIs every day. They used to call me Blondie because my hair was light in those days. And I remember something, I haven't thought about it. They had so much food, and by the time I was done in the morning, about 11 o'clock, I could smell that food, and I was so hungry that I thought, I wonder if I could ask for something, and I was too proud to do that. You just don't, when you're a middle-class French girl, you don't beg for food. That's something is not done. But I used to think, the little native children used to come to the kitchen there, and they would give them leftovers, you know. They played them dirty tricks. Now that I recall that, I used to be so upset. When Bud told me, I said, that's shameful. Those little children were Muslim. They don't eat pork. So, GIs, being as GIs are, when they ate leftover, they would make noise like a pig, and those poor little children would try to make themselves vomit because they told them they're eating pork. And I told Bud, I said, you tell your buddies that this is a horrible thing to a child who is hungry. You don't do that. That's cruel, and it's not necessary. And I don't know whether he did or not. Probably not. But anyway, I got pregnant immediately, and I thought, I have.
You still didn't say how you met Daddy.
Oh, okay, I met yeah, okay. Well, anyway, one time I saw Bud, didn't even know his name, putting his clothes on a line. He had washed something, and it was windy that day, and it kept blowing away, and I thought, oh, that poor little guy, he just can't even hang his dirty socks on the line. So I stole from my mother, I had to steal them because you couldn't buy things like that, a few clothespins, put them in a bag, and then I went to the fence and I said, that's for you to hang your clothes. He said, do you speak English? I said, a little bit. And then after that he would come and wait for me to get out of the office where I was working, and he followed me home.
Just like a stray puppy.
But yeah, just like a puppy. So anyway, like I was saying before, I got pregnant immediately, and I thought, I have to go back to the States. What am I going to do with that baby? There is no milk, there is no baby clothes, there is no diapers, there is nothing. So, I really don't remember exactly what I did, but I got in touch with the people in Algiers. I had my papers to go. You have to have papers. You didn't come to the States just like, you know, you had to have papers, you had to have a physical exam, and I don't know if they still do that, but that's what was done. I remember when I went for a physical exam, my mother took me, naturally, and it was an English doctor. And of course he put me on the table, and my mother was like that. Are you going to touch my daughter? And he examined me, you know, and then he went out for something, and I looked what he was, he said, well-fed female. I said, gee, maybe I'm a horse. But anyway, so the people in France, in England, had established a program to send the work brides back to the States because there were so many of them. But in Algeria, there were not that many. So what they would do, they would ask the captain of the boats who were going back to the States if they would accept to take a few work brides. So the captain of that Liberty ship, I remember the Liberty ship's name was R. Davis, something like that. So yeah, I can take a dozen, because the Liberty ship was empty. They used to carry cargo, and there was nothing in it. It was going back to the States. And then a few GIs who were going back, and the crew, and the officer, the captain. So, okay, I've just been told that I should tell more about my marriage to an American citizen. Of course, in France, you have to get married twice. First, you go to the town hall, because there is separation of church and state. You can get married at the town hall and not to church, but you cannot marry in church if you don't marry to the town hall first, because that's the official wedding. So in the morning, usually, you don't put your gown on, you just go to the town hall with your witnesses and your parents and whatever, and you get married. And they give you a paper saying that you marry so-and-so, and then in the afternoon, you have a church wedding. Well, I was brought up as a Catholic, Roman Catholic, and my husband was of course a Protestant. And so when I went to see my old priest to say, I don't even remember his name, Father something, I said, I want to marry an American GI. He said, why are you going to do that? I said, well, I guess because we're going to. And I said, we would like to get married in a church. And he said, oh, that's fine. He said, is he Catholic? I said, no, he's not Catholic, he's a Protestant. And he said, oh, you cannot marry him. I'm going to go talk to your father about that. And I thought, oh, dear, a problem, no problem. I said, so I found out there was one small Protestant church, and I went to see the minister with my fiancé then, and I said, this is my problem. I am Catholic, my husband is Protestant, the priest doesn't want to marry us, but I want to be married in church. I want the blessing of God on my ceremony. And he said, no problem, I'd be glad to do it. And I thought, oh, that was easy. So we got married in a little Protestant church. And it was very nice. When in a French wedding ceremony, you don't say, I do. You say, yes. Well, yes in French is oui. So when they asked my husband, will you marry Giselle? He said yes. She said, tell him to say oui. He said, oh, oui, oui. Everybody laughed. I said, one oui is enough. Anyway, so then we had a lovely dinner in a big hotel, and then we went straight to Algiers to start our papers for me to go to the States, because he was sent back right away. He was overdue to be sent back, so he sent back right away. And then I waited to have a chance to come to the States.
How long did you have to wait?
Well, about 6 months. So we get on a ship. There was about 12 girls. There was a woman who had a baby, myself, who was expecting a baby, and all the other girls were just brides. No babies, no pregnant. So we went on a ship, and they put us in the back of the ship. They had I guess where the crew stayed, they had bunks. Well, it was in February, and the water was so rough. We all got sick. I was so sick, I thought I was going to die. So they told the captain that the little French girl who is expecting a baby is really, really sick. And he said, well, we have to take them away from the end of the ship and put them in the middle, where it does not well. I was still sick because it was horrible. It took us 3 weeks to cross the the Atlantic Ocean. 3 weeks, it's a long time. But that's when I discovered how kind and wonderful American people are. The soldiers who were there, the crew, treated me like a little princess. I was a little French girl who was going to have a baby and was so sick. She couldn't eat, she couldn't drink, all she could do is lay in bed and vomit. And the captain said that he never had such a crossing, the worst he ever had in his whole life. I had to be on that one. So, one night, I never locked the door of my cabin. One night I heard a knock on the door. It must have been 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. And a couple, GI, came with a big jug of hot chocolate. And he said, we're going to come and spend a couple hours with you. And I was not afraid because they were wonderful. And I said, well, why? No, just forget it. We just brought some chocolate. And then I found out later that they were expecting a hurricane at sea. So the captain said, we have to make a sharp turn. And when you make a sharp turn on a little boat, it can break in two. So he said, the first one out of the ship is the little French girl who's expecting a baby and the woman who has a baby. They are the first one out. Well, we didn't have to do that. The boat didn't break. And finally, we got to Philadelphia. And that was my first steps on American soil. And I cried, and I cried. I was so frightened. I thought, what is going to happen to me? I don't know anybody. I look at my husband. He was not like I knew him. He didn't have a uniform on. He had civilian clothes. He didn't look the same. I thought, what am I doing here? Well, anyway. So I went to stay with my in-laws. I was extremely fortunate. My mother-in-law, father-in-law were wonderful people. They were the sweetest, most gentle person on earth. And they welcomed me with open arms. They didn't know how to tell my name. Nobody could say Giselle, so they always called me Honey. So I became Honey to them, which was okay with me. And, well, Bud was working at JNL, and they said, we have to look for a house. Well, there was no house after the war. Nobody was building. There was no building material. But he found a couple, old couple, with a little shack. It was like a shack, not really a house. And he bought it. I can tell you what he paid for it. $3,500. And when he got the loan on the GI Bill, the mortgage payment were $17.50 a month. Now you must remember that he was only making about $200 a month. And so we moved in that little house, and I was so lonely and so homesick. He worked turns. I was alone with a baby. My son was a beautiful baby, but he didn't want to go to bed at night. I had to rock him and rock him and walk him, and I would put him down, and wah! I'd pick him up, walk him, and walk him, put him down, wah! Well, anyway, that's when I really started to physically go down. I couldn't eat because I couldn't keep food down. My mother-in-law told my husband, there's something wrong with your little wife. I think she has TB. In those days when you were thin and sick, you had TB. He said, take her to the doctor. So he took me to the doctor. The doctor examined me. He said, no, there's nothing wrong with her. I'll tell you what's wrong with your wife. She's homesick. And I started to cry. I said, oh, no, I am not homesick. I am not homesick. So, but then received a bonus. All the soldiers who went to war, after the war, received a bonus for serving overseas, And since he had been overseas over 3 years, his bonus was rather substantial for those days. I think it was over $300. Those days it was a lot of money. And he said to me, he said, do you want to go home? I said, yeah, I want to go home. He said, will you come back? I said, I'll come back, but I can't tell you that you can't tell me go for a month or go for 3 years. I said, I'll come back when I know I can come back and stay. And that's what I did. I left in September, and I spent the whole winter in Algeria with my son. It was like being born again. It was wonderful. And he loved it. They cherished him. I mean, he was like a king. And they used to buy little lamb chops for him and all those good things, you know. And so he did very well. And he learned to speak French. When we came back to the States, he spoke only French.
That was his first language.
That was his first language, yeah. So he was playing with the children outside. They were speaking English, he was speaking French, and the mothers would come around and listen. They thought it was hilarious. Well, a shy little boy who see grown-up people laughing at what he says, don't like that. And I never forget, he came back in the house and he said, I don't want to speak French anymore. And I said, why not? He said, they're making fun of me. Shortly after I came back from France, and I was gone bad, and his brother had remodeled the house, and it looked so much better than it did before I left, and I felt much better about being here, and so I had gone to a jewelry store to lay a watch away, called a layaway plan in those days. When you didn't have money to pay for it, you laid it away, and you pay $5 a week or $10 a week. And the owner of the jewelry store said, would you like to work for me? And I said, Mr. Croix, I don't know how to sell things. I was a teacher, not a salesman. He said, you learn. So it was my chance to make a little money for myself, which I didn't have very much of. But I was not very happy about me. It was, you see, you can work on the weekends, and then you work for Christmas. Well, anyway, I started, and I loved it. And I had a little money, and I could go buy a few clothes, and a few things for the house. I enjoyed myself very much. And I enjoyed selling. The people were very nice. And so I worked there on the weekends, and I worked for Christmas. And after Christmas season, I told Mr. Croix, he was the owner of the shop, that, all right, it was very nice working with you, for you, Mr. Croix. And he said, oh, no, you're part of the staff now. I said, oh, I am? I said, yeah, you come back to work on the weekend. And then something happened that really changed everything. My son contracted polio in August, and he was a very sick little boy. And fortunately, he was able to recover without any paralysis or anything like that. And the doctor we had believed in natural food, so he gave him a lot of natural food pills to take, and he took them, and he did fine. And then my mother, who didn't believe when I said my son had polio, but he is fine, came to spend the summer with us. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Okay. And we had met a good friend in a man from Belgium who came to the States. His name was Eugene. You remember him also, don't you?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And he used to come to our house because he felt welcome. And so when my mother came to visit, she had somebody to talk French with, and he had somebody it was a good period for us. We had, Mark was better, and it was fine. And then, let's see. Well, he was 5 when he got polio, so a year later, maybe not even that, he started school. And something real funny had happened. In those days, there were so many baby boomers that they only gave half a day. You had school half a day. No kindergarten, just half a day. So his teacher, I don't recall her name, and we got acquainted, and she said, he will come and he'll do his work, and then he will take it back to her desk, and he said, I'm all done, I'm going home. And she said, you can do that yet, Marcel. He said, well, I'm done, I have my work done, I'm going home. And she said, no, you can't do that. So he had to learn to follow the rules. She thought he was a very sweet little kid. And, well, I wanted another baby, and I wanted a little girl, so I got pregnant, and my little girl was born. I was sick as a mangy dog while I was pregnant with her, but she was born, and she was my little girl. She was a most contented baby. I nursed her, she was good, and her brother thought she was wonderful. He used to push her in a buggy, and he said, that's my little sister. Her name is Denise. And then Bud had wanted to build a house, so he bought a piece of ground in Raccoon Township, and he started to have the house built. You were old enough then to remember that, don't you, son?
Oh, yeah.
And I had told him, I said, okay, you want to build a house in the country? Fine. But before I move in the country, I have to learn to drive so I can take my kids to the doctor, to go to school, go to the grocery store. Well, never let your husband teach you how to drive. It was a nightmare. So I said, something nasty. I said, you go to hell. I'm going to go to driving school. He said, good. I went to driving school, passed my test the first time. I told him, I said, see, I passed my test and nobody told me I was stupid. But anyway. And I had told Bob, I said, all right, I'll move to the country, but I have to learn to drive, and I will not move in a new house until everything is finished. Because I had lived in the little old house with 2x4s, and I didn't want to go through that again. So, he said, okay. The house was sold a lot faster than we expected. And the people said, yeah, you can stay there. You just pay our mortgage, which was a lot more than what we had paid before. And that didn't go very well with Bud, who was very close to his pennies. And he said, no, we have to move. I'm not going to pay, I don't know, it was maybe like $50 a month. I'm not going to pay their mortgage. And so we're going to, so instead of moving in a house that was half finished, I moved in a house that was not finished at all. There was no floor, a plaster on the wall, and the floor was covered with plaster, and Didi was crawling, and her little arms peeled off because the lime in there. No kitchen. The kitchen was in the basement. It rained every night. The water will run through the basement because it was not finished, and I would get up and put my boots on and cook breakfast for my husband before he got to work. And I kept thinking, this is not what I wanted to do. Well, to make a long story short, eventually the house was finished and got better And then,
So you were living in the house while Bud was working on it, and he had other contractors come in, or
well, not very much. That he had
he did
the
most
roof
of
put
it?
on by a carpenter because he couldn't do that. He had the electricity done by a friend of ours, and he had the plasterer because in those days we plastered houses. We didn't have drywall; it was plaster. But it was a long way to go. The floor had to be put in, the bathroom, the kitchen, and it was not very much fun. Frankly, it was not. And I worked right along with him. And then my little girl grew up, got to be 6 years old. She started to go to first grade, and he was in high school. And he got along fine there. He made friends there. He chose a Scott, and we started to go to Sunday school. And we were establishing our roots there. And then I went to France to spend the summer with my little girl. He refused to come. He didn't want to leave his friends. Do you recall that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I said, well, if you don't want to come, you're going to have to stay here with your dad for all summer. And so his dad took him to his grandmother when he went to work, and then brought him back and stayed with him and worked in the garden and all that. Well, when I come back home, I had a call from Bud said, you better call Geneva College. They want to talk to you. So I called. I just got back. And they needed a French instructor desperately. So they had called the high school. At the high school, they knew me because I had gone there, and I knew the French teacher very well. I had done a little bit of teaching, and went to see Dr. Clark, and he said, Mrs. Connell, would you like to help us with French this year? I said, well, okay. And I thought it'd be a year. Well, I was there 20 years. But it was a wonderful experience. Just loved it. I love my students. I love the faculty. I love the atmosphere of the college. It was a great, great experience. And then Bud had a heart attack, and then he had another heart attack, and decided to retire. And I said, well, if you retire, you're going to go to Florida. I'm not going to work anymore. So I stopped working, and we started to go to Florida, first for a few weeks, and then for a few months, and then when I stopped and he retired, we went for the winter. I loved it, like warm weather, but hated it. I want to go home and plant my garden. It was a struggle, and but we did that for quite a few years. And then he stopped it. Right. Going to Florida for the winter was a delight to me, since I detest cold weather. But who is rather negative about everything, wanted to be in Florida when he was in Pennsylvania and vice versa. But I prevailed, and we spent the winters in Florida. Well, as it happened sometime, in 1997, Bud went for a regular checkup at the doctor, blood tests and so forth, and they discovered that there was blood in his leaking somewhere. So they took battery of tests, and they discovered the tumor in his colon, and that he had to have surgery. And then when they did more tests, they discovered that he had an aneurysm in his abdomen, which is even more serious. So they really didn't know if they were going to do one, and then later another one, and they say, we'll decide when we go in. So he was in surgery for a long time, and when he came out, they put him in intensive care for about a week, and it was not easy. I think that too much anesthetic affected his mind, so he seemed to recover, but he never was like he was before. And slowly it started to deteriorate, and we had a house and he naked ground and a lot of work to be done, and he just could not do it any longer, although he said he could. He said, "You don't know selling my house." And I said, "Well, but you can do the work." "Oh yes, I can do anything I want to." Well, that was talk. But since his mind was getting more fuzzy all the time, I guess I had to wait till he didn't know really what was going on. And I decided to put it in the hands of the real estate, which was really the easiest thing I'd done, because she took care of everything. It was a man and a woman. They took care of everything. And when people would come to see the house, Bud would say later, "You know, they were nice people. They came to see me, but I don't remember them." And I said, "Well, they remembered you." So anyway, the house was sold very quickly. About 6 weeks, the house was sold. And then I had the enormous job of getting rid of 45 years of accumulation of friends. And I still don't know how I did it, but eventually everything was sold, the house was sold, and I decided that our best bet would be to go back to Florida permanently as resident of the state of Florida. So I went down and I bought a bigger unit, so it would be more roomy and easier for Bud to get around. And when he came down, he liked it a lot, so we established ourselves. It was in the same park. We had good friends. We had a good church. And I started working as a volunteer at hospice, because they came and helped me when Bud needed to be bathed, because I could not bathe him. He would fight me all the way. And when another woman came to bathe him, she would say, "Mr. Conner, will you please lift your leg?" "Oh yes, honey." But when I told him, "Lift your leg," "I don't want to," which is a common thing between sick people and family. So, and it was a long struggle. He was sick for almost 5 years, and the last 2 years he was in diapers, and I don't wish that on anyone. It is a horrible way to finish your life, but it was done, and all my friends say, "You have to put him in a nursing home." And I said, "I will when I think I'm ready." Well, evidently, the good Lord heard my prayers. I had prayed for 2 things: that he would die before me, so I could take care of him, and that he would have a peaceful death without pain, and it was also granted. So I'm very, very thankful. And when he got terribly ill, well, it was not so much ill, that weak. He had absolutely no strength at all. And I called, it was over the weekend, so I called hospice and I said, "Something is wrong. I cannot even get my husband out of bed. I am not strong enough to lift him, and he is not strong enough to help me get him up." So they said, "We'll be right over." And God loved them. They examined him, the nurse came, the social worker came, and they said, "We're going to take him in our facilities." And my son and daughter-in-law came down, because there was, I had good friends, but they put him in a beautiful place, and he had wonderful care, but it was about an hour from the park, and since I'm not a very happy driver, I know I couldn't do it. So Mark and Josh came, and Bud lasted 3 days. And one night, after we had come back, they called and they said, "Mr. Conner passed away peacefully in his sleep." And it was right after Christmas, So we had to hurry up and get things organized. Fortunately, I had made arrangement with the VA Veteran Administration who took care of funeral in a national cemetery within Bushnell near Tampa. And I had paid for the funeral. By the way, before I forget, I paid for mine too, so my kids wouldn't have to worry about that. And so we had the funeral day before New Year's. And granddaughters came, a grandson, my daughter's older son came, and he was buried. It was a beautiful day, and he was buried in a national cemetery, a beautiful, peaceful place. And every time I go there, I am thankful that it is such a nice place. And I have no regrets at all. My life is pretty close to the end. I don't know what's going to happen, but it's up to the good Lord. I'm ready to go anytime He wants me. I think I have more people on the other side than here. And when I look back on my life, I think it's been fulfilling, busy, at times very painful, but somehow I lived through it, and I love my family with all my heart, and I have wonderful children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, and for my last word I say God bless.